You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood, art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Dale Chihuly. Dale Chihuly was born on December 20th, 1941 in Tacoma, Washington. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, he was surrounded by the rugged beauty of the coast and the vibrant greenery of the forests, which would eventually play a massive role in his artistic vision. Unfortunately, when Chihuly was just a teenager, both his father and his only brother passed away within a year of each other. Needless to say, it was a difficult time, but his mother, Viola, was tremendously supportive. She encouraged him to follow his interests, even allowing him to redecorate the family basement as he pleased. This was his first real experience with interior design, arranging a space to create a specific feeling. Later, in interviews, he would credit this as the spark for his interest in how art interacts with its environment. Chihuly studied interior design at the University of Washington. It was here during a weaving class in 1963 that he had a sort of epiphany, a light bulb moment, if you will. For a project, he decided to incorporate glass shards into a tapestry. He was fascinated by how the glass caught the light, unlike the opaque fibers of the yarn. This experiment led him to melt down a piece of stained glass in his basement, and please don't try this. He used a simple metal pipe to blow his very first glass bubble. He was captivated by the magic of the material, the way it transforms as it melts and then solidifies, how it plays with the light. I mean, glass is pretty amazing when you stop to think about it. After graduating, Chihuly wanted to learn everything possible about the medium. In the mid-1960s, though, there wasn't really a studio glass movement in America. Glass was mostly seen as something industrial, made in factories for jars and windows. Chihuly helped change that, though. He studied at the University of Wisconsin and later RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, where he eventually established one of the first major glass programs in the country. A big turning point came in 1968 when Chihuly received a Fulbright fellowship to study in Venice, Italy. He was the first American glassblower ever invited to work at the prestigious Venini Glass Factory on the island of Murano. Chihuly noticed the collaborative approach of the Venetians. Rather than one artist working alone on a piece, a lead glassblower would work with a team of assistants to create massive, complex pieces. In 1971, Chihuly co-founded the Pilchuck Glass School. He wanted a place where artists could teach other artists in a communal environment. Under his leadership, Pilchuck became a global hub for glass art. But just as his career was skyrocketing, there were some major setbacks that forced him to reinvent how he created art. The first, he was on a trip to England, and he was in a serious car accident that sent him through the windshield. He lost the sight in his left eye and required hundreds of stitches. This is why you almost always see him wearing that signature black eye patch. But this wasn't just a style change. Losing that eye meant losing depth perception, which is vital for a glassblower. I mean, think about it. They're working with molten material at the end of a long pipe. But he didn't let that stop him. He continued to blow glass for a few more years, but in 1979, he suffered a severe shoulder injury while he was surfing. And this made it just physically impossible for him to hold the heavy glass blowing pipes himself. Many people might have given up at this point, but Chihuly is one of those people who realizes that one person's crisis is another person's opportunity. It forces you to step back, rethink things, but it doesn't force you to stop. He embraced that Venetian team model. He stepped back from the heat of the furnace and became sort of a director or choreographer for the team. No longer working directly with the molten glass, he was able to see the bigger picture in a way he couldn't while he was focused on the end of the pipe. He began using vibrant gestural drawings on large sheets of paper to communicate his ideas to his team. This shift allowed him to think bigger and bolder than ever before. He started creating massive installations, hundreds of pieces of glass working together to transform an entire room or garden. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Chihuly's work became more organic. He moved away from perfectly symmetrical vases and started letting gravity and centrifugal force shape the glass. He created series inspired by nature like Seaforms and macchia, which is the Italian word for spotted. These works weren't just objects, they were experiences. Today, Dale Chihuly is one of the most recognized living artists in the world. His work is in more than 200 museum collections, and he's created massive public installations from the canals of Venice to the Tower of David in Jerusalem. Now, for today, I want to look at one of his most famous series, Seaforms. Dale Chihuly once said, quote, "I love to go to the ocean and walk along the beach. If you work with hot glass and its natural properties, it begins to look like something that came from the sea." End quote. The Seaform series, which Chihuly began in the early 1980s, is probably his most iconic representation of the organic style. These sculptures are made of blown glass that's incredibly thin, often described as diafanous or gossamer, meaning they're just so delicate they almost look like they're made of light rather than a solid material. To create the distinct shell-like texture, the team uses optical molds. Now, if you're like me and wonder what that means, I found a post where Chihuly explained these are basically metal forms with internal ribs or ridges that give it a little bit of texture. When molten glass is put in, it will create vertical ribs in the glass. Then, as the glass is spun and blown, these ribs expand and curve, mimicking the natural growth patterns found in the ocean. Because Chihuly wanted the glass to look natural, he and his team stopped trying to control it perfectly. They allowed gravity to pull the molten glass down and used centrifugal force spinning the pipe to flare the edges out. And this is how they got that signature slumped asymmetrical look that makes them seem less like man-made vases and more like living organisms caught in the current. This natural organic element extends to the display as well. Rather than standing alone, they're often shown in sets or nests where smaller, translucent glass forms are tucked inside larger, wavy bowls. The colors are often inspired by water, deep cobalts, seafoam greens, and sandy ambers, often finished with a thin lip wrap of a contrasting color. And this thin line of color around the edge of the glass serves a dual purpose. I mean, for one, it emphasizes the wavy, irregular shape of the piece, but it also adds a little bit of structural strength to the paper-thin rim. While they aren't literal copies of specific sea creatures, they definitely evoke that feeling of the ocean. The transparency of the glass mimics the way that water holds light, and the nested shapes suggest the idea of protection, growth, and the cycle of life. There's something really amazing and magical about looking at these sculptures because, I mean, yes, they're glass, and it's kind of a solid material, but they also seem soft, like the organic forms just feel casual and effortless, and yet, like, obviously it was the result of a lot of hard work. There's something deceptively simple about these pieces. I think what I'm most drawn to is this sense of controlled chaos in the work. I mean, glass work is very much a science as much as it is an art. For those not familiar, working with glass is pretty complicated because you have to not only be aware of working with molten material and safety concerns, the heat that it's going to melt at and all of that, but different glasses have different coefficients. And what those coefficients would mean is like, it's the coefficient of expansion. It's different glasses will expand and contract at different rates depending on the heat and the temperatures and stuff like that. So if something cools down too quickly, you're going to have thermal shock, and that's going to cause things to crack or shatter. But also if you put different glasses that have different coefficients together and try to fuse them together, you're going to have problems because as they're cooling, going to contract at different rates. And again, that's going to cause structural issues, basically like cracks and breakage. So you have to be very thoughtful and deliberate about how you create these things. And yet he finds ways to create room for random chance and spontaneity, for the glass to not be so precisely controlled by the artist, but to allow that spinning motion and the gravity and everything else to sort of find its own form. It's really cool when you think about it. More broadly, Seaforms, it kind of changed the way we think about art. It helped to break glass out of that, quote, craft world. It's no longer just something useful or decorative or ornamental. Seaforms really helped a lot of people to see glass as a fine art medium. By focusing on the sculptural qualities and the immersive experience of the installations, Chihuly showed that glass could be just as expressive as oil paint or marble. This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.